Hello there, and welcome to the Dear Dyslexic podcast series, brought to you by Rethink Dyslexia, the podcast where we're breaking barriers and doing things differently. I'm Shae, your host, and I'm so glad you can join us. I'm a fellow neurodivergent, and I'm coming from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, where I live and work. And I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to all the tribes across our beautiful country and to all First Nations people listening today. Our podcast was born in 2017 out of a need to give a voice to the stories and perspectives of adults with dyslexia. And our voice has grown stronger year after year. We're now a globally listened to podcast with guests from all around the world. Join us for insightful conversations about living with dyslexia and other neurodivergences across all walks of life. Our special focus is on adult education, employment, social and emotional wellbeing, and entrepreneurship. We're excited to be bringing you this episode and invite you to like and follow us, or even better, why not leave us a review on your favourite podcast platform. So let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Dear Dyslexic podcast series. I was not sure which podcast I was on then. That's a problem with having more than one podcast. I am delighted. I'm trying not to use excited. I'm delighted to have on our show today, Kim Percy. Have I said that right? God, this is a cracker of a start to our conversation.
It is right.
I'm doing today to talk about late diagnoses of dyslexia with Kim. Kim and I have worked together now for a couple of years on different projects, and she helped to relaunch Rethink Dyslexia with our amazing branding and messaging, and is currently helping me to work on my book cover. So we've done lots of projects together, and Kim and I often talk about the impact of diagnoses later in life. And so we thought it would be a good topic to talk about because we haven't had the opportunity to discuss, even though there's lots of us out there, late diagnosis. And I feel like I'm quite young compared to a lot of people I know now from my diagnosis at 27. So I'd like to welcome Kim to the show today. Thanks, Kim, for joining us. It's been a hard time getting us here, but we're here.
We are. Thanks, Shae. Thanks for inviting me along.
So, Kim, you and I have talked a lot about being diagnosed later in life. And I should have mentioned also that you're an amazing artist and you're doing your PhD. So today's topic was hard for us to choose which path to go down, but we thought that this might be an important topic to talk about. Can you share with us a little bit of your journey and how you ended up deciding to get diagnosed with dyslexia?
Yeah, thanks, Shae. So my diagnosis, or my journey, I should say, into getting a diagnosis started with like a lot of parents, with the diagnosis of my youngest son, who was diagnosed in year 2. He's now 15. He's in year 10. And seeing what he was going through and recognizing similarities in myself, I realized that there was something that we shared in common. I decided to get a diagnosis rather than just going, okay, yeah, maybe I'm dyslexic, maybe I'm not. I decided to get a diagnosis when I started my PhD, and I needed or wanted that support to be able to get accommodations and get a bit more of an understanding about what it is and who I am through the lens of dyslexia. And my topic of research is on dyslexia, and I'm using my visual art practice as a vehicle method to have a look at dyslexia. So it all kind of tied in and made sense. So I was diagnosed at the age of 51 or 52, I can't remember.
That's why I feel like I was young. I don't feel like a late diagnosis. Even though when I talk to people, they say 27 was old. What were the similarities that you saw in your son when he was going through the process that resonated with you?
I think that there were Well, maybe I'll just take a step back and talk a bit about the what I saw in my son, and then had a look at some of those similarities. So what I was seeing was a really bright, engaged child who struggled or, had difficulties with some of the basic kind of words or understanding. So he was not a child that was ever interested in books or he loved being read to. He was never pick up a book and just sort of flick through it. Even picture books, he was never really that interested in. And as we went through, there began to be a disconnect between what the school was saying about my son and what I was seeing at home. So I was seeing this really happy, engaged child, and at school they were seeing a child that was disruptive, that was disengaged, and who didn't seem to want to participate in a lot of the classes. So that was my first kind of warning. At the time, he appeared to read because he had a really great memory, and he was really good at looking at picture books and interpreting the meaning. So for those early years, when you only had a few words on the page, he seemed to be reading. We realized that was not the case when we started to look at those golden words, or the red words, the ones that are that you need to learn, that don't necessarily have a picture to go with them. And we noticed that he was not able to articulate those particular words. So those sort of things started to form a pattern for me. He then started to get more and more in trouble at school. He was constantly being sent to the, principal's office, sent out of the class. We began to see that he was out of the class more than he was in the class. And I felt that there was something wrong, that it wasn't a behavioural thing or a defiant disorder, as the school was trying to tell me, because we weren't seeing that behaviour at home. So there was a large sort of chasm between at home and it was only when a teacher asked him to read out the numbers in year 2 to ring me, and realised that he could not read the numbers on the page. And that was the first time the school sort of went, oh, there might be something more than just a child that's not wanting to participate or engage. So those sort of things, I remember myself having similar concerns. The difference was that I was an early reader. So I'm unlike a lot of dyslexics because I actually learned to read. I came across as learning to read very early. I consume books at a great rate. And I was one of those kids that always had my nose in a book, which is why I was never picked up as being dyslexic. So I didn't quite answer your question, but I thought we'll probably.
Wow. And I think that seems quite common with a lot of girls. I was the same, where I was an avid reader. And so you would never have known it was my writing that was identified first rather than my reading. Though I do remember being in a reading recovery group in primary school, but I was an avid reader as well. How did you feel when you were going through that journey with your son and then going through it for yourself? Because that's really hard when the school is saying one thing, but you're seeing something different, and then you're starting to see the same traits within yourself.
It was really hard, and it continues to be. I'm continuing to advocate for him on a regular basis so that journey doesn't stop. I think that what it opened up for me was memories of being a child who felt different, felt disconnected from my peers, would spend time in my own little fantasy world. I was not interested necessarily in playing with other kids because they didn't seem to understand me or what I wanted to express. And I could see the similar thing happening with my son. Which was also the case for my eldest son, though he had friends that connected with him on that level. But my youngest didn't seem to have the same sort of level of connection in that way. And I think also because he was labelled very early on as being a troublemaker. So there was often conflict in his world, and that sort of spilled out into his friendships, I think. So while I spent time outside of that friendship kind of narrative, he was really wanting to connect with people a lot more than what I was probably at that age.
So how did you support your son then? If you saw you were in your own bubble in a way through childhood, how did that, did you mind being in a bubble where your son wanted to find friends? Was it because you were so good at art as well that you kind of immersed yourself in other activities that didn't need to talk to people as much?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those, chicken and egg. Did I gravitate to art because it was something I could do on my own? I think what we're looking at is what is that first point of success? And those moments of success for a child is really important. And I think my first, drawing was one of those things that I remember, adults sort of praising me for. And so therefore, was I always creative? Was I always good at drawing? Or did that sort of evolve because I did get that success? Music was one of those things for my son. It was the first time that he sort of had success, was playing music. And he was able to read music a lot easier than he was words. So he was able to find something within that, which I think is really important.
Well, that's interesting. There's two thoughts. One is that's interesting how he's able to read music, but my dad actually reads music, so that's interesting. But also, I lost my thought.
Yeah, I think that, just on that point about reading music is if we look at dyslexia as being interpreting symbols or marks, and in written language, when you've got a linear set of letters which make up a word, which make up a sentence, et cetera, which is all very sort of formulated, whereas music has a different formula. And I think that the grounding it has, with the 5 lines and the little, circles, it is a different way of being able to see or be able to interpret. So I think that there is a different resonance. And I think that's another reason why I'm quite good at art, is I'm really good at interpreting symbols and interpreting marks. So that's a little bit of a sideline, but yeah.
Yeah, because I wonder with music as well, because you're listening. So it's kind of like you've got a melody, you're learning with your ears as well as your eyes. And I mean, when we're reading, we're listening to the words we're saying, but there's a rhythm with music that we don't have so much with reading. So I wonder if that helps in how the brain absorbs and learns in that sense. Because I find if I listen to music, I retain the words a lot easier.
That's
The words of a song. I can repeat words of a song nearly to perfection, really really, really from childhood. And I'm not saying nursery rhymes, common songs we would have heard as a teenager, for an example. I could still sing those songs now if the tune started playing.
I think that there is a point, and that I think that's where it sits in our memory as well, and how we actually access that information. And when it's an auditory process coupled with a visual process, then, it's that multisensory learning kind of, which we know really works for dyslexics.
And I think going back to your point when my brain froze was about the one when you got praised for when you did your first drawing and your son with his music, and how important that is to start working from a strength-based approach with our children. But then as you were talking, I was trying to think of when was the first time I was praised. I can't remember a time when I was a child that sticks out.
Yeah.
You're saying, or for your fun. which is, again, just a side note. I was just reflecting as you were talking, but it was making me think about how important it is for us to be praising children from an early age.
Yeah, finding that core. Because what I was seeing, which also resonated with myself, is that my son was constantly in trouble at school and constantly being told that he is not, participating in the way that was expected. So when we took him out of school into these music lessons, it was a different environment. It was one-on-one, so you didn't have that audience. And I think that really can be difficult for dyslexic people, having an audience when you're in that performance anxiety or that in that stress response. So I think that one-on-one makes a really big difference.
Yeah, it takes away the shame and the embarrassment within a group setting that you can feel when you're dyslexic or when and you can't read properly or you can't say the right answer. It's a lot easier not to feel so stupid if you're with a single person.
Yeah, and you build up a relationship, and I think relationships are really important. Thinking back to my own experience at school, it was the teachers who I formed a relationship with that I was able to learn the best from, and it was often just an understanding or a sense of understanding that I felt from them, and that just made all the difference.
And then you can have the polar opposite, can't you, around the teachers that you remember doing the worst things to you.
Yeah.
So moving through, so once you got your diagnosis, how did that, I guess there's so many different things that we could talk about. How was that for you and your son? Like, you felt that you were more, like you could reflect more around what he'd been through?
Yeah, so what he's going through now, as a teenager, I can see, he's come a long way, but, there's the layering. And we talked a bit about this because your book cover, one of the design elements that we've used in it is this idea of the sort of the consecutive rings, which is kind of like that pond where you drop a stone into the pond and you get the consecutive rings, which kind of reflect out, but it's also that notion of the onion. So you may have an incident that happens that then you create a narrative or a story around that, and then that then becomes another narrative on top of that, and so on until you end up with this really hard kind of exterior on this kind of ball of kind of emotional responses. And that hard exterior may come across as being aloof, or may come across as being dismissive, or may come across as being super organized, or whatever that is. But in the center of that, I think that there's often, you can probably trace that back to a series of incidents or something that may have actually occurred.
At Rethink Dyslexia, we are doing things differently. As a global leader in creating inclusive environments for adults with dyslexia, our commitment is to provide individuals with opportunities to live healthier, happier, and more connected lives. Through our range of tailored services, including coaching, learning and development programs, consultancy, and training, we're helping dyslexic individuals, businesses, and organisations to better understand and support their dyslexic employees. So if you're looking for insights, inspiration, and expert advice on dyslexia and how you can provide inclusive practices and environments, then head to rethinkdyslexia.com to find out more, or book your free consultation today.
So I've just been aware of that and looking back on my own childhood. I talk about this diagnosis as being like a gateway, and you've got the one side, there is, the garden of childhood, or in my case, it's adulthood up until my 50s. And then looking back through at all those events that happen there with the lens of dyslexia, I see things very differently, and I'm able to kind of, one of the things I'm trying to do at the moment is articulate both visually and in my artwork, as well as in my research, what those things are and how my response then has shaped the person I am now. And I talked about sort of having there's a whole lot of different things. I've got a garden, and I like the metaphor of the garden. I've got a beautiful apple tree in the garden, which has these beautiful apples, which are all the accomplishments that I've done over my life. But underneath the apple tree, there's also the skeletons that are buried there. And I can choose to go back and dig up the skeletons and go through them and work out what it was that may have been the hurt and the anguish and the shame and everything else, the trauma that may be buried there. Or I can let them lie there and I know that they're there and I can go and visit them if I need to. But I can also pick the apple and take that through into my new life.
And that's a beautiful analogy. I think, for some people that I've spoken to, it's a revelation that they've got this diagnosis, and for others, it's a huge trauma, like it was for myself. And I think being able to picture it in that way where, you can pick all the achievements and take them into, because it reshapes you as a new person in a lot of ways. And I think that's why I became so unwell, because I think I was grieving the person I was, not knowing how to be the new person. And so I think, with an analogy like that, where you have a choice to leave some things behind if you need to help you create this new person that you're becoming.
Absolutely. And I think that it's also my age probably helped with that. Being older, I've got a good sense of who I am and the work that I've done in the 50 years. Whereas at 27, 28, that's a really formative time where you're stepping out of that young adulthood into the new, a later adulthood. And I think that that's such a more vulnerable time. So I think that makes a difference. But I think that there's still the experience of going through a diagnosis. For me, it was a relief. It's like, oh God, that's why. But I can also see how, there's a lot there that probably still needs to be unpacked for me. And, I'm not trying to do it in a hurry. I know that it's there. I know that I need to keep working at it. But I'm also knowing that, I've got this. I think one of the things that's been really amazing is finding community. So meeting people like yourself, Shae, and other people that have been in our community has been so affirming. And we're all really different people, but there's something there that is common. There's a thread there that I think is so valuable. And, when people ask me, why'd you get assessed, or should I get an assessment? And I'm always I feel that that's an important thing because it does create a sense of belonging and a language that makes sense, and it makes sense not only to yourself but to other people. And that's a really important sharing, I think.
And that's actually what I was going to ask you, what were some of the things that helped? Because I know when I was diagnosed, I didn't know anyone that was dyslexic. When people contact me and say they don't know anyone. But I think, finding our tribe and being able to create this community that we have has been so important, because it is really isolating. And it can be hard sometimes. And yes, there are definitely some common threads between all of us, even though we are all very different. But have there been other things as well that you've found helpful since being diagnosed?
I think that there's a lot of things. One is I have a sense of purpose. So it's been really important for me to be able to articulate the journey of dyslexia, and especially in terms of a creative journey, so that I can hopefully bring awareness or build strength and awareness around this subject, because I still think that there's a lot of people who may be dyslexic who have never been diagnosed for numerous reasons. And it can be, I hope that to dispel some of the myths and dispel some of the stigma that's associated with it. And so for me, this has been really, really positive to be able to offer something through research and through exhibiting artwork that hopefully somebody else can take something away with them that's positive.
Do you think your art has helped you in transitioning? Like, has it been an outlet that's enabled you to create a new version of you in some ways?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I use my artwork in all sorts of ways, but for me personally, it is a way for me to digest and to process and to explore different ways. You know, how does dyslexia affect me? You know, what are dyslexic traits? What are attributes? How does the difficulties that I experience with spelling and writing and working memory, executive functioning, all of those things, how did they shape the person I am and continue to do so? How do the strengths, how do I use visual, spatial awareness? You know, I see that as being a trait that many dyslexics have talked about. Narrative, how do I use narrative? You know, so all of those sort of things, I'm able to explore in a visual and really grounded, really tangible way, both through photography, through painting, through video. And it's something, it's a tangible record. It's a tangible object, which then other people can interact with and have their own interpretations and stories and narratives and everything else that they experience. But it isn't like, reading a book or watching a video of somebody explaining something. It works on a lot more of a subconscious level. It's a lot more of a heart level. And, it connects with people in a different way.
Do you think it's helped? Did you feel like you needed to do some healing afterwards and that art has helped with that process? I wonder if we look at our strengths, if that's a way of helping to heal any trauma that we've felt from being diagnosed in adulthood, or even those that get diagnosed in childhood still come through into adulthood with a lot of trauma.
Yeah. I think art is very healing. I think it's still a process for me. It's only been, less than 2 years since I was diagnosed. So it's still early days. And, I've had a very structured, doing a PhD is a very structured kind of process. So it'll be interesting to see when I finish the PhD and what actually transpires after that. And, I'm sure there'll be a whole lot of other, journeys back into the back garden to dig up those skeletons. I think it's an ongoing process.
I'd really love to talk about family dynamics, but I don't know if we've got enough time today. But I know that we've had conversations about the impact that dyslexia can have in family dynamics and the responses of those around us sometimes when they feel like we're too in it. We're too neurodivergent or too dyslexic, all consuming.
Yes.
And I know when I was first diagnosed, everything was about, that's because I'm dyslexic. That's because I'm dyslexic. And my family would say, we don't want to hear about your dyslexia. And they still say that because now it's my job.
Yeah, I still get that. I do get that. It's been interesting. I'm thinking about, we do know that it's a genetic, dispositions, and seeing it through my family and ADHD. I'm seeing that through my family as well, on what that looks like and the responses. And the responses not just from family, but from friends as well. It's been, interesting. And sometimes I've got to just keep my mouth shut because I know that people just don't want to hear about me talking about it anymore.
Which is hard because it becomes part of our identity. And I never thought I would say that, but it is. It's not our whole identity. It's a portion. It's a portion of us and the way that we do things and see things and the way we understand the world around us, I think. So you can't take that part away from us. So it's hard to disconnect that when you're within your family.
Yeah.
Or your friends or in society, really. We talked about the importance of getting an assessment. We know that can be such a financial barrier for some people. Are there any thoughts or anything else that you think has helped you through your journey that others might help others, whether they are formally diagnosed or whether they want to or whether they can't afford it or it's not for them, but they still identify as being dyslexic or neurodivergent.
Like I said, I think it can be really useful. It's a useful tool to have that diagnosis. And I think that there is a barrier. It's really hard to get assessments. So really hard, especially in regional areas, to get somebody who can do those assessments. It's expensive. And that's a really big barrier. I teach as well. So I teach at university, and I'm seeing a lot of students who are coming in with various neurodivergents and undiagnosed. Often they don't know. And I see the struggle that they go through and the lack of support and lack of help.
I think that's the hardest part, is helping people that haven't had the ability to get diagnosed, and they feel like something's not right for them, but they just have no idea what it is. And then those labels of being dumb or stupid or, slow follow us because we haven't had that opportunity, or we haven't had the awareness to know that it could be a neurodivergence like dyslexia. And I think it's shattering to see young people coming through that have missed those opportunities for a diagnosis. And it's not there. I'm not blaming the parents. I blame the education system, really. There's a failure that we're still seeing again and again for young people as they transition into adulthood that have not had those opportunities. And I'm not sure what we can do yet to support, apart from doing things like this, where we're helping to raise awareness.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that there is so many holes in our system, both from primary school all the way through to tertiary and supporting young people. But I also think that there's a lack of support or lack of awareness for adults as well. And I still get people say, well, I've got this far. Why do I need to get a diagnosis? And it's interesting, that question. And it's a question I asked myself before I went and got assessed. I've had a lot of success in my life in various different careers. I am at a point now where I'm able to, teach at university level. I'm doing a PhD. I've run my own company, but the innate struggles and the complex coping strategies that I have put in place to be able to support myself through that, I think what would have happened if I'd had that support early on, or if I had that recognition early on, what else could I have done? Where else could I be? And I think it's this notion of, you just struggling in silence, and that idea that, well, you're doing okay. It's not about doing okay. It's about doing brilliantly. It's about really shining. And if having a diagnosis helps to foster that idea of thriving, then why not? Why not go for that? And there are support structures out there if you know where to go for it, both, all the way through from, primary school all the way through into your adult career. So why not take that opportunity to really, really experience life to its maximum, as opposed to just getting by or doing okay? And I think that hitting that bar, and I often hear that from other women who are my age, who are like, well, I've done all right. And it's like, yeah, but you could have done, and it may not have been so difficult. It may not have been such a long road, and the exhaustion that dyslexic people often experience just doing what could be a normal everyday thing, that could have been avoided. Could have had so much more energy done. So, I'm a firm believer in really shining and thriving as opposed to just doing okay.
I think that's a wonderful way to wrap up this conversation, because we have shone a light on the impact of late diagnosis, and we're seeing it happen more and more across all the neurodivergences, but we're not hearing a lot from the late diagnosed voice of the adult with dyslexia. So I'm really excited that we were able to have this conversation and the importance of getting a diagnosis. So thank you for coming on the show to share your story, and I look forward to showing everyone your amazing art. And we have to have you back on the show to talk about your PhD journey, because we haven't even had a chance to touch on that. And that in itself is such an amazing achievement, to get to a PhD level and to be doing it. And through art is so exciting to watch just how you're growing and how your art is developing and sharing these stories. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Shae. I really appreciate it. And it's just been amazing meeting you and having the community that's around Dear Dyslexic as well.
Well, thank you. It's been amazing to meet you and to be able to tap into all of your strengths, your many, many strengths, and your artwork that I'm a huge fan of as well. So thank you so much for coming on the show and for sharing. It's so important to hear different people's voices and perspectives around diagnosis. And for those that have listened to this today and you're wondering, how do I get a diagnosis? I can't afford it. We do run a dyslexia screening program with our wonderful Dr. Judith Hudson, who's our psychologist, who does the assessment, the screening that gives a likelihood of dyslexia. We've had a lot of women come through our program, and they've found it so valuable to just have that reassurance that, yes, it is dyslexia, and that there are things that can be done to support them. So if you're interested in finding out more about that, you can look on the Rethink Dyslexia website, and we'll also share those details when this podcast goes out. And if you'd like more information on how to get assessed, please reach out to us at hello@deardyslexic.com.au. No, wrong email address. hello@rethinkdyslexia.com.au. Anyway, it'll all be in the notes because we can't spell, and that would be helpful rather than me trying to spell it out, because I will get it wrong. I feel like this has been a bit of a chaotic podcast, trying to host a podcast with my toddler screaming in the background. So thank you for being so patient with me, Kim, and for everyone that's listened today. We hope you've enjoyed it.
Thanks, Shae.
Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye.
If you haven't done so already, make sure you sign up to our mailing list so you can keep up to date with everything we are doing at Rethink Dyslexia. So head to rethinkdyslexia.com.au. And don't forget, if there's anything you heard today that was distressing, you can contact Lifeline on 13 11 14 or Beyond Blue on 1300 22 46 36. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.